Final flash presentation is going to be from Dr. Kimberly Cox-York, who's the Director of the Research Integrity Office at another CCTSI partner, and that's Colorado State University. Herself a researcher with a PhD in nutrition and prior experience in biotech, Cox-York has been leading important programs at CSU, such as the Ethics Infusion Program, and she's been dedicated to supporting the active mentoring of graduate trainees at CSU. With experience in both IRBs and RCR training that we've talked about already today, she's well positioned to give us the perspective of the Research Integrity Office.
Am I on? Perfect. All right, well, gosh, going last, I have so much to talk about or think about from all the rest of these amazing speakers, but I'll try and stay on message for a little bit here. So my title is what's the role of the Research Integrity Office and institutional policy in fostering a culture of excellence. And you'll see I've underlined policy and culture, and we'll talk about that as we move along. So some of the institutional policies, right, that address some of these things that we've talked about, obviously research misconduct as the RIO and the RCR director, right? I face these things on both sides of the coin. I hopefully am getting folks on the front end trying to prevent things, and then I'm also getting things on the back end, unfortunately, when they've gone wrong. We have research data policies, conflicts of interest, of course, everything surrounding human and animal work, bullying and harassment policies, which fall under other offices, but now we know there are requirements from the funders that in the research setting, because of some of the issues we've talked about today, they require reporting of actions that are taken in these other spaces, right? So we got to work across campus in all of these spaces. And then, of course, personnel handbooks that go from the institutional level all the way down to the department level. So we have lots of policies that guide us. Most of these are developed in response to undesirable or negative events, right? So again, we're catching things on the back end. And I would argue that that's really not where we want to be, right? We'd rather be on the front end, trying to mitigate. There we go. So what about things we don't have a policy for? Yeah, and some of these behaviors we've talked about today. Detrimental research practices. What do we do about unmerited authorship or no authorship credit? Mistreating trainees, not sharing data and materials, misleading statistics. How do we get our eyes around that, right? P-hacking, P-harking, nobody's keeping an eye on that. Breaking confidentiality and review, right? These are all things that happen at the level of the person. Maintaining inadequate records, failing to disclose CSI or COI, and fragmentary or duplicate publications, right? These are all things that we don't have policies to dictate, and I would argue really is not where we need to be anyway. So the results of these things are exactly the same though, right? As research misconduct. We end up with a finding of FFP. It's really leads us to the same place as these detrimental research practices. We lose dollars in funding, lots of years of lost training and work, as we know, as we've kind of talked about. Folks just put their heads down. They don't want to talk about it. They just get their head down, they get their work done, and they move on. Yeah. Advanced knowledge is impaired. Sometimes if things are retracted or not, right? The research record is built upon fallacies. And then ultimately where we find ourselves now is that science as an institution is less effective and less trusted, right? We find ourselves in a place where science in general is less trusted, and scientists' trust is also declining. And that's really not where we want to be. So this quote, I've always loved, culture eats policy for breakfast. Yeah, and that's where we're trying to get. What is a culture of excellence? How do we get to a culture without, aside from policies? Policies usually are consulted on the back end, right? So here's the policy that dictates why we can send you through this process. Folks are not sort of reading the policies and trying to follow them and set up their labs in, kind of along the lines of whatever policy. We have to dig them out when folks are like, well, show me where it says that. Show me where I have to do that. And that's really not probably the best way to approach these. So policies don't dictate behavior. How do folks behave when no one's looking? Yeah, this is the stuff that really leads to misconduct and a loss of trust in science. And so how do we foster this culture of excellence? It's hard. We've talked about some of the things today. There are lots of good folks doing this work, and it's underfunded. Yeah. So we have more and more mandates for training, which is amazing. Again, in response to bad behavior, sadly. But we don't really get more money to do this work. Yeah. So we have to just keep doing it and keep. So the Research Integrity Office, right, obviously we're guided by these policies, and we have lots of federal policies and regulations we're also guided by. But we really have to work in collaboration with others, right? So researchers, the provost's office, graduate school, libraries, IT, research associate deans, other institutions, right, working together, sharing resources, and enforcing these things and as a culture for each other, I think is really important. And how do we do this? We create and disseminate and integrate, right? Really importantly, meaningful, right? Those two words are underlined because I think as Dr. Gonzalez said, there's not a one size fits all. They can't be a checkbox, right? These must be integrated and meaningful trainings and discussions that happen across groups and not just like in a classroom, right? And they have to happen regularly. So these are the things that the NIH has pointed out and NSF, mentorship top of the list, yeah? And it's taken a while for us to get here because we've been mandating trainees to have training for a really long time. And we tell them what to do. And I'll tell you, as the person who delivers that training, often I'm the one who's, telling these young folks that they have to do better, that they have to be better, that they have to do all of these things. And their eyes are like, right? All of these things that we're trying to incorporate DEIJ and mentoring and data and they kind of gloss over and are like, oh my God, is this really where I want to go? Is this what I'm signing up for? And every semester, someone, kind of timidly raises their hand and says, does my PI have to take this? Right? And until very recently, the answer was no. So, how do you then deliver this education, with passion and sort of, and tell them that they are the future of science, which is what we do, but they have to return to their lab. And the same things are maybe not being translated there. So I guess thankfully, again, I'm still an N of 1, even though now we're also training PIs and key personnel, which I'm very happy about, but could use more help in doing that. Finally, we're going to be able to get some access to these other folks. Yeah. And again, right, these should not just be one-off trainings. They have to be in situ conversations that consist that occur over and over again. Yeah. So that's what we're trying to do. And right, it's a challenge. There's just about it. So I guess, we had sort of this opportunity to be a little provocative. I don't particularly find this provocative, but I think the uptake is a little bit slow. So one of the ways we can do this on a larger scale is by promoting open science or open scholarship. And this is the UNESCO definition of open scholarship and their recommendation on open science. And it kind of encompasses a lot of the things we've talked about today, right? An inclusive construct that combines various movements and practices aiming to make multilingual scientific knowledge openly available, accessible, and reusable for everyone, to increase scientific collaborations and sharing of information for the benefits of science and society, and to open the processes of scientific knowledge creation, evaluation, and communication to societal actors beyond the traditional scientific community. Yeah? It comprises all scientific disciplines and aspects of scholarly practices, including basic and applied sciences, natural and social sciences, and the humanities, and builds on the following key pillars: open scientific knowledge, open science infrastructures, science communication, open engagement of societal actors, and open dialogue with other knowledge systems. Yeah, that's a very comprehensive definition, but it really does encompass a lot of things that we've touched on today and where RCR education and really research integrity is fundamental. So I've just listed a few things here, and I was going to put links, but I didn't want it to be too messy. So hopefully you can find most of these things. But if you've been following, hopefully the OSTP memo, the Nelson memo that came out is kind of the new data sharing mandate, right, by 2025. It's supported by the Federal Year of Open Science, which is the promotion arm of kind of the open scholarship movement in the United States, at least. The Higher Education Leadership Initiative for Open Scholarship, or HELIOS, is a national organization that is about 96 institutions at this point. CSU is a member. I'd love to hear maybe where you all are in this space. But it includes things, the conversation includes things like the funders, right? So federal funders are in this conversation, philanthropies, institutions and societies, publishers, not surprisingly, relatively absent, right? They are hopefully coming to the table, but they're slower. So you can imagine that their livelihood is a little bit at stake under this model. This is also with the NIH data management sharing plans, which other institutions have, or other funders have indicated they will go and follow suit in this same direction. Philanthropies are already doing this. Institutions aligning missions with incentives, right? So we have to incentivize this type of work. And security. So we have to, right? We've also got these mandates to have secure data. So the kind of the mantra is as open as possible and as secure as necessary, right? So these are not small questions. These are not small issues. It's a big ship to turn, but hopefully this is where we're headed. The little graphic in the top is sort of how we get there, right? So we need a policy, which we now have. So it's been mandated by the Nelson memo. Incentives need to change. So we're not just looking at publications, and H indexes, right? As we've sort of talked about today. Data sets get persistent identifiers. You get credit for your data set. COVID taught us this, right? We would not have had vaccines in the time that we did if folks were waiting to get their paper first. Yeah, I think we want that for lots of other diseases and big challenges that we have in our scientific landscape. And so getting data out sooner, the sooner the better. This takes also community involvement. Folks need to be on board. We have to make it easy, right? So this can't be a difficult thing to do. There have to be repositories available. There has to be funding available for repository and for data management. And there has to be infrastructure. So this is also not a small issue, right? These are big servers. Where are we going to keep all this data? How are we going to manage it? Not to mention the environmental impact of running giant servers. Yeah. So not small questions, but it took us a long time to get where we are. I think we're ready to sort of start the shift. And I would love to talk to anyone on campus about how you all are thinking about this stuff, how you're managing it. But this is kind of the next, I think, frontier of research integrity, is really opening it up, having more transparency, and hopefully this is what the new generation is coming up thinking about, right? They're already sharing, they've got their work on GitHub, right? They know these words. I just am learning these words, many of them. And right, open software, containerization, places where we can do this stuff all in one place. So this is, I think, again, sort of the next frontier, and where I think, at least I'm spending a lot of my time in kind of research integrity to move things forward. Yeah, so right, open scholarship and research integrity, availability of data underlying publications, better data. They're establishing metadata standards, and data management starts at proposal, right? So we're having the conversation before we are gathering data, and this should be happening at the level of everyone in the lab. RPT shifts the incentive to data sharing, not just H indexes and high impact journals. Open access journals, are preferred under this model. The cost of an APC is not ignored in in this system. So that's being addressed. And then hopefully some expansion of preprints and registered reports, yeah, where folks are publishing their hypotheses and their methods, and then they're published regardless of what the results are. I think this is where we want to go, and this is where we want to be. So that's all I have for now. I know it's kind of it is a lightning talk. So I covered a lot, but love to have conversation with anyone who is interested and kind of see where you all are in this space. So,
Great, thank you. And looks like we already have a question.
okay.
Great talk. So about, I don't know, 20, 25 years ago, I remember reading a survey that said that scientists and physicians were the most trusted members of society. That has plummeted tremendously, especially because and during the pandemic. How do we regain that trust from the public?
Yeah, so excellent question. And I keep an eye on those surveys. The most recent one is down to about 74%. And the other side of that, they did another one of the Pew surveys, the 2021. They also asked if folks trusted science more if data was available, right? And that was a yes, right? So there was much more trust in science if the data was available. So again, is our grandma going to sit down, with her R package and start looking at, a data set? Likely not, right? But knowing that those data sets are available for other scientists to evaluate, and knowing that it's open to it's open peer review and all of those other things, I think does provide transparency and hopefully increases trust. The other side of that is seeing outcomes, right? So there was some obvious issue. Not everyone was in line to get a vaccine, right? And the speed of the vaccines actually unsettled some folks. But I think if folks start seeing more results from cures, right, progression, then they start trusting scientists. My field, nutrition, is very tricky, right? Eggs, are they good or bad for you, right? Like this is our daily fight, yeah. Again, letting folks understand what is science. Why does one study say eggs are good and one say it's bad, right? And having folks in front of the community, I think makes a big difference. Hopefully that helps. Yeah, more outreach. Yeah.
Balance, and this is not to deny the importance of open science, the open data and things, but how do you balance open scholarship with the need for peer review and expert interpretation? And just to draw on Sonia's example from the pandemic, I mean, how do you help people understand that a poorly study purporting to demonstrate the benefit of hydroxychloroquine in COVID, isn't something that should guide, the way that they treat their disease or decide upon vaccination or not? It seems to me like expert interpretation and peer review are still very important.
Yeah, absolutely. And that doesn't go away, right? But what it does is opens the process. So that data is now open to more eyes, right? Because so you can look at a peer-reviewed paper, right? And you can say, this is in a great journal, it's a great author. And we also know that the replication studies, cancer, there's a recent biology one in ecology, right? The exact same 250 scientists evaluated the same data set and got different results. Yeah. So that system, while our standard and gold standard isn't infallible, right? And certainly when folks see that 168 papers have been retracted in our gold standard system, that breaks down pretty quickly, right? And that's what hits the headlines. So the idea, and again, it's not ready to go. It's not, right? It's going to take some time, but the requirement to publish the data underlying a paper at the time of publication hopefully takes us that one step closer, right? Because now experts outside of the peer review process can look at that data at the time of publication, and they do have the expertise to look at it. Again, similarly, preprints and registered reports, that process is done in the open. And what I will say is on the research misconduct side, I was able to short circuit an allegation of some folks that brought forward an allegation for one of our investigators. It was in a registered report. So the methods and the hypotheses had been vetted right before they did any of the work. All the data was there, and these folks had commented on the data and had, they had access to all of it and they could run the data. Their allegation was based on the interpretation of the result, right, which is not research misconduct. That is a disagreement in outcomes. So by opening that up and having that happen in a public space, hopefully cuts down on some of that, because peer review is still, right, happens kind of behind the scenes. Yeah. And all the journals are not necessarily reputable. So as a layperson, I don't know the difference between her and one of these other predatory journals. It's a peer-reviewed journal, right? That's what I read in the newspaper. So again, not foolproof. We haven't rolled it out far enough to test it. And that's why we need everyone in the conversation part of it. Yeah, absolutely.
Maybe we can take one question from the chat before we move on in the program.
Yes. So Zoe from the chat says, I don't believe residents doing master's programs at CSU have to do RCR training courses. How can we improve there when integrating hospital duties, master's classes, and research?
So master's students in residency. So the folks who are in the med school component of CSU.
That school.
That's cool. Okay. Yeah. Yeah. So, well, right. So again, it comes back to resources. It's who's required to do RCR training at CSU. Actually, it's extra. It's more expansive than is required. So any trainee, graduate student, postdoc on USDA, NSF, or NIH funding has to take RCR training. The same is going to be true for faculty, for PI and key personnel, even though it's only mandated at this moment by the NSF. We're applying it across the board. Anyone can take those classes. And we have 20 other classes that are kind of distributed across the institution that we try and keep getting more so that folks are getting it in their department. But it's really comes down to resources. So again, love to provide it, N of 1. But please take the class. Just come to Grad 544, sign up. Yeah.
Great. Thank you. Thanks, Dr. Cox-York.